The midday sun hung high over Riverview, casting long shadows across the shopping center parking lot. It was the kind of afternoon where people moved lazily, escaping into the air-conditioned stores or hurrying to their cars. The usual sounds of chatter and distant honking filled the air, until they didn't. The sharp voice of a police officer cut through the noise. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle." Lena James tightened her grip on the steering wheel of her sleek silver sedan, her knuckles turning white. She took a steadying breath before turning her head. Outside her window, Officer Brent Holton stood with his legs planted wide, one hand resting too close to his holstered gun. His eyes were cold, assessing, but not with curiosity, with judgment. Lena had been here before. She reached for the window control and rolled it down, her expression calm. "Is there a reason for this stop, officer?" Holton's lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smirk, but wasn't friendly either. He didn't answer the question. "License and registration." No explanation. No courtesy. Lena moved deliberately, making sure her motions were slow and visible. She had seen what happened when someone moved too fast. As she handed over her documents, she met his gaze. Steady, unwavering. Holton barely glanced at the papers before looking at her again, his expression unreadable but still tinged with something ugly. "What's your destination today, Miss James?" "Home, after a long day's work." She watched his eyes flick to the car's interior, to her tailored suit, to the subtle but unmistakable markers of success. She knew what he was thinking before he even said it. "Work?" His tone dripped with doubt. "In a car like this?" Lena didn't flinch. "Yes." His smirk widened. "What do you do?" "I'm an attorney." That made him pause, but only for a second. He didn't look impressed. "Oh, an attorney," he echoed, the words thick with sarcasm. "Which firm?" Lena allowed a small, knowing smile to cross her lips. It wasn't amusement. It was a warning. "You'll find out soon enough." Something flickered in Holton's eyes. Annoyance. Uncertainty. Maybe even a hint of fear. He wasn't used to being challenged. His fingers flexed near his belt. "Step out of the car." Lena's heart pounded, but her face remained calm. "Am I under arrest?" Holton's jaw tensed. He hadn't expected pushback. "Step out." His voice rose, sharp and impatient. Around them, people had begun to notice. A few heads turned. A man near a gas pump paused, phone in hand. Someone else pulled out their own device, recording silently. The air was shifting. Lena inhaled slowly. She had choices. But in this moment, there was only one right thing to do. She unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door, stepping out with a confidence that made Holton's fingers twitch. The asphalt radiated heat beneath her heels, but she stood tall. "Hands on the hood." "No." The single word sliced through the air. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Holton's face darkened. "What did you just say?" Lena met his glare. "Unless I'm being detained for a legal reason, I refuse to comply with an unlawful order." The muscles in Holton's jaw worked as frustration built inside him. He took a step closer, reaching toward her, but Lena's voice rang out again, calm but razor sharp. "Think very carefully, officer. Any unwarranted contact will be a violation of my rights." Holton hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. That's when the second patrol car pulled into the lot. Sergeant Ray Collins stepped out, his sharp gaze assessing the scene, the gathering crowd, and finally, Lena. The moment recognition dawned in his eyes, his breath caught. He turned to Holton. "Brent, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Holton frowned, confused. "This woman was resisting." Collins didn't answer right away. He turned back to Lena, straightening his posture before speaking. "Miss James." There was something in his voice. Respect. Caution. Holton's brow furrowed. "Wait. You know her?" Collins let out a slow exhale. He looked at Holton as if seeing him for the first time. "Do you have any idea who she is?" Holton blinked. The first trace of doubt crept into his features. Collins's voice dropped lower, warning. She's our new boss. And just like that, everything changed. Silence. For the first time since the stop began, Officer Holton didn't have a response. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. He looked from Sergeant Collins to Lena, then back to Collins. New boss? That couldn't be right. Lena crossed her arms, her stance unwavering. I was going to introduce myself at the station tomorrow, but it seems I get to do it here instead. The weight of her words settled over the parking lot like a heavy fog. The crowd, still recording, leaned in closer. The energy had shifted entirely. Holton's chest rose and fell in rapid breaths. This had to be a joke. Boss? The word felt foreign in his mouth. He had been in this department for years. He had gotten away with stops like these dozens of times. Now, standing in front of this woman, this attorney, his body burned with something between embarrassment and anger. Collins cleared his throat. Miss James has been appointed as the new Civil Rights Compliance Director for the department. She starts next week. Lena held Holton's gaze. That means every case of misconduct, every unnecessary stop, every abuse of power, they go through me. The crowd murmured, their whispers now filled with recognition. She wasn't just an attorney. She was going to be in charge. Holton's fingers curled into a fist. His pride screamed at him to push back. She was grandstanding. She was making a scene. She was right. He had pulled her over for nothing. He had escalated for no reason, and now there was no escape. Lena took a slow step forward. She was close enough now that only he and Collins could hear her next words. You profile people like me, don't you? Holton's nostrils flared. You see a black woman in a nice car, and you assume she doesn't belong in it. You see confidence, and you call it an attitude. You see resistance, and you call it a threat. His heart pounded. Tell me, officer, she continued, her voice even but sharp enough to cut through steel. If I were anyone else, if I weren't your new boss, how would this have ended? Holton didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew. A bead of sweat slid down his temple. Collins, arms crossed, finally spoke. Miss James, I think we're done here. Lena arched an eyebrow. Oh, we are far from done. Collins hesitated. What do you mean? Lena turned, addressing the crowd now. She gestured to the people still recording. I want every single one of you to hold on to that footage. Don't delete it, because I'll be reviewing it when I get to my office on Monday. Holton stiffened. Her office. Lena exhaled, shaking her head slightly before looking back at him. The problem with men like you, Officer Holton, is that you think you're untouchable. A bitter taste filled his mouth. But I'm here to change that. The crowd erupted into cheers, applause rippling through the parking lot. Holton's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. He could feel his world closing in. Lena turned to Collins. I'll see you at the station. And just like that, she walked away. She didn't rush. She didn't turn back. She simply climbed into her car, started the engine, and drove off, leaving Holton standing there, drowning in his own failure. Holton stood frozen, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on him like a vice. Around him, the crowd slowly dispersed, but their whispers lingered in the air. The recording phones, the murmurs of, "Did you see that?" The judgment in their eyes. It all stayed with him. Sergeant Collins exhaled and ran a hand down his face. Brent, get in the car. Holton didn't move at first. His pride, the very thing that had driven his actions, was now the thing keeping him rooted in place. His chest tightened. The uniform he wore, the one that had once made him feel powerful, felt stifling now. Brent, Collins repeated, firmer this time. Slowly, Holton moved. He climbed into the passenger seat of the squad car, staring straight ahead. He could still feel the eyes on him. The shame. Collins slid into the driver's seat and started the car. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a quiet, measured tone, Collins said, You really screwed up today. Holton clenched his jaw. I was doing my job. Collins let out a short, humorless laugh. No, you were flexing your power because you thought she was beneath you. And now, you've made a mistake so big, it's gonna follow you forever. Holton turned his head sharply. It was just a traffic stop. Collins's grip tightened on the steering wheel. No, Brent, it was a power trip, and you lost. The words stung more than Holton wanted to admit. By the time Holton arrived back at the station, the news had already spread. Whispers followed him through the halls. Some officers wouldn't meet his eye. Others shook their heads. A few smirked, enjoying the show of seeing one of their own finally take a hit. Then came the call from the captain. Holton sat stiffly in the small office, staring at the man across from him. The captain's face was unreadable, but the tension in the room was thick. Officer Holton, he began, tapping his fingers against the desk. You have put this department in a very difficult position. Holton swallowed. Sir, The captain raised a hand, cutting him off. You're suspended. Effective immediately. Internal Affairs will be conducting a full investigation into your conduct. Holton's stomach twisted. Suspended? This is ridiculous, he argued. She is your superior now. The captain interrupted, his tone sharp. And she has already filed a formal complaint. Holton felt the floor shift beneath him. His breathing became shallow. If the investigation finds what we all already know, the captain continued, leaning forward. You're done, Holton. Holton stared. His pulse pounded in his ears. Done? As in, fired? As in, no badge, no job, no pension? You're dismissed, the captain said. Holton stood, his body moving on autopilot. The station felt different now. Colder. He walked through the hallways like a ghost, ignored by the same people who once respected him. He had been untouchable. Now, he was a dead man walking. Lena James entered the station on Monday morning with her head held high. The moment she walked through the doors, people noticed. Some stood a little straighter. Others whispered. A few exchanged knowing glances. She had made waves already, and she wasn't done. Collins was waiting for her outside the captain's office. He nodded in acknowledgement. Miss James? Lena met his gaze. Sergeant Collins. He hesitated before speaking again. Holton's out. IA is digging through his records now. Something tells me they'll find plenty. Lena nodded, unsurprised. Good. Collins studied her for a moment. You really are here to clean house, aren't you? Lena smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was a promise. I'm here to make sure the right people wear that badge, and the wrong ones, they won't last. Collins let out a slow breath. You know, you've got your work cut out for you. Lena didn't flinch. I know. And she was ready. Holton's downfall didn't end with his suspension. Within weeks, his past actions came to light. Complaints buried under red tape resurfaced. Old cases were re-examined. A lawsuit followed. His career, once untouchable, crumbled before his eyes. Meanwhile, Lena's influence grew. She didn't just review policies, she rewrote them. She didn't just sit behind a desk. She showed up, she listened, she held people accountable. The station changed. The city changed. People started to believe that justice wasn't just a word. And Officer Brent Holton? He became a cautionary tale. A name people whispered with a shake of their heads. A reminder that unchecked power could, and would, fall. As for Lena, she wasn't done. She never would be. Because justice wasn't an option. It was a necessity.